It's time to talk sports. It's Hacksaw's Headlines, a panorama of the world of sports, stories, comments, and opinions. Now, here's iconic sports talk show host Lee Hacksaw Hamilton and co-host John Riley.
Who wants to talk sports? Who wants to talk football? We do. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, along with my co-host, John Riley, broadcasting from left field in our DIXIELINE Lumber and Home Center Store studios. We have a special Hacksaw's Headlines podcast we're going to present today. Our podcast brought to you by DIXIELINE Lumber, 9 locations in San Diego, serving you for more than 100 years. You got projects for the fall, into the winter, something for the holiday, for the home. You need a best friend. That best friend is DIXIELINE Lumber and Home Center Stores. John, I thought we'd do something different, a bit of a different topic on the table. As November turns into December, we're talking about NFL playoff races, and what better time, crunch time, to flash back to the history of the San Diego Chargers, our team that went to the Super Bowl in 1995. Yes, everybody's got an opinion about the owner taking the franchise out of San Diego to go be anonymous in Los Angeles. They can take the team. They can't take our memories. And that's what we're going to focus on the special edition of Hacksaw's Headlines, the road to the Super Bowl.
It was a great time in San Diego history, and I know you were there the whole way. So let's just start off. I mean, how did this whole thing really kind of begin?
Well, let's start about the ownership. You know, the Chargers in the old AFL, the Chargers in the Diane Fouts, Eric Coryell era were owned by Gene Klein, and they had that great run. They had some great games. They never, ever got to the Super Bowl, which is a massive disappointment. Franchise was sold in 1984 to Alex Spanos from Stockton. Spanos had a friendship, a working relationship with Al Davis. Al Davis of the Raiders introduced Alex Spanos to NFL people. Spanos showed up and bought the club. I believe the price tag he paid was about $85 million in 1984. Said franchise now is worth $2.6 billion in valuation. Spanos walks in the door in 1984 as the owner. He inherits what's left, Don Coryell, Dan Fouts, Kellen Winslow, and that's it. Everybody else from the legendary early 80s Chargers is gone. They don't win. He fires Coryell that second season. Then they hire an assistant coach, Al Saunders. He's the head coach for 1+ years. They have an unbelievable start. At one point, 8-1. It was my first year as the voice of the Chargers in '87. They went 8-1. They lost their final 6 games of the season. He got fired. They fired the general manager. So they brought in a new general manager, Steve Ortmeyer. Steve Ortmeyer brought in Dan Henning, who had great success as an offensive coordinator, had Super Bowl rings and all that. And Spanos thinks they're off to the races. The bottom line is the roster was old. The draft picks they had failed on never came to fruition. It was really a poor team. And that begat a whole bunch of 6-10 and 4-12 seasons. And therefore, Spanos decided to make another move. He was really successful in the home building business in Stockton and Northern California. He was not successful as the owner of an NFL team. He had no concept whatsoever about how hard it was to put together an NFL franchise. So he was frustrated, and the stories of him walking down the hallways on Monday at the stadium in the Chargers offices and doors slamming and him being upset because they lost. He had no reality of how you build a franchise and how it takes time. And what he bought was the tail end of the Eric Coryell era. And now Dan Fouts had retired. Kellen Winslow had retired. All the players of that great era were gone, and it was a massive rebuilding job. So they stumbled and struggled my first couple of years. He fired Ortmeyer, he fired Henning, and here came the hire. The first hire that kind of changed everything. It's really interesting.
So Bobby Beatherd really was began this whole thing. I remember he came from the Redskins.
Bobby Beatherd had cut his teeth as a player personnel guy with the old Kansas City Chiefs. Then he went to Miami as a player personnel director, worked under Don Shula. They became really good. And then he went to Washington and worked for a crazy man, Jack Kent Cooke, who was as irascible as anybody. And Bobby put together with Joe Gibbs, whom he hired. Joe Gibbs had been here at San Diego State way back in the day as an assistant coach. They put together Super Bowl teams that really did well. Beatherd got tired of working for Jack Kent Cooke, who had tried to put his hands on everything. They parted ways. All of a sudden, Bobby Beatherd shows up in San Diego, and it was absolutely amazing. I think Alex Spanos got the recommendation on Beatherd from Al Davis. So Beatherd arrives, and he inherits an absolute mess. It's a team with failed draft picks. It's a team really without a quarterback. They never, ever got to replace Dan Fouts correctly. It took an enormous amount of time. And then Bobby just started to build this thing. And he went all types of places, all types of directions. I didn't know him. I knew the name. I didn't know him. He knew me. First time I'm walking down the hallway at the old Qualcomm Stadium in the Chargers offices, I hear somebody yell at the end of the hallway, "Hacksaw!" And he said, "Come here." So I walked down. I didn't even know who it was. It was Beatherd. He had just been hired. He knew me from talk show radio. He was a media junkie. And he was so different. And he was so offbeat. And he'd go surfing every day in Carlsbad.
I remember that.
And then come to work. General manager with a surfboard. He was really cut from a different cloth. He was accessible. I mean, today's modern day NFL is CIA closed door.
Right.
He was accessible. He returned phone calls. He talked to you in the parking lot about anything and everything. He was the most unique guy from a management perspective I ever dealt with. And I really liked him. He was really unorthodox, but he had built his history on scouting, boots on the ground, going everywhere, turning over every rock. You know, one of the greatest players he ever had with the old Washington Redskins was Darrell Green.
Oh, yeah.
Tiny cornerback, Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm.
Darrell Green, Texas A&I, small college. And he just kept repeating those successes. He went to the HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, and he'd scout Jackson State and Grambling and Mississippi Valley State. He kept unearthing all these players, and he traded picks. Holy cow, you thought George Allen traded picks. Bobby Beatherd traded draft picks, but he just kept making deals. And all of a sudden, things started to get better. But to do all that, he needed a guy to pull it together, and he did something very unorthodox. Next question, please.
Okay, so Bobby Ross comes to town, and now we're really starting to see some changes.
I knew who Bobby Ross was from college football. He had coached at Maryland, coached Boomer Esiason, very successful. He flipped that program. He went to, of all places, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, ACC power. Well, when he was there, yes, he won a national championship with Georgia Tech. Think about that.
That's amazing.
He had been in and out of the NFL briefly as an assistant coach, I think special teams guy, maybe in Kansas City, but then always went back to college, had worked for Lou Holtz at William & Mary, had relationships all over the Deep South. And all of a sudden, Bobby Ross gets hired as the coach of the Chargers. And he walks into a situation in which they sure don't have a lot of players here. And Beatherd had just kind of gotten started. Ross was old school. He was beyond old school. He was 1948 old school in terms of structure and discipline and dedication and game planning. And all of his assistants were kind of cut from that same cloth. It was just really, really different. I liked Beatherd because he was so diverse and so offbeat. And I like Ross because there was a structure to Bobby Ross. He couldn't tell you if the sun was shining outside or if it was snowing or what happened in the nation's capital and government. He was so laser focused on this. Mm-hmm. He was just a really, I think intelligent, good old boy from the Deep South. He was really from the Deep South. You know, I look at him and I think to myself, that's what Bear Bryant was probably like. But I got along great with him. I knew what the parameters were. I knew the structure. He would tell me things that I could not say on the talk show, but just his deep background, and I trusted him. Deeply religious man, phenomenal guy just in terms of values. He'd talk to you about life, my wife, my kids, his wife, his kids. He had a big expanded family. We'd sit there and talk about that rather than X's and O's and how the hell are you going to beat the Raiders. So he was just really all football all the time, but he was a man of value and balance. And I'm still friends to him this day. When I go back east, I go see him in Virginia. He lives in a retirement community now. Bobby's not a young dog. He's 85. But he loves where he's living because there's 2 football coaches that live in that retirement community. They're 87 and 90, and he talks to them every day about what's gone on in the NFL, what's gone on in college. So Bobby Ross, Boss Ross, he was the first guy in after Beatherd came. And then we get to the players.
The players. I mean, the one that the key guy was Stan Humphries. When he came over to the Chargers, everything really changed.
Well, we're going to talk about players because you have to have players to win. But before we deal about that, let's get to halftime.
Okay.
Our bonus podcast is brought to you by DIXIELINE Lumber and Home Center Stores here in San Diego. John, we're building things in our house. We're renovating in this house. We're doing the kitchen. We're doing hallways. We're doing bookshelves. I don't know anything about projects except I have to write the check to pay the bill. But that's where these people, DIXIELINE Lumber and Home Center Stores, become your best friend.
Yeah, they're terrific people there. I mean, you need paint, hardware, lumber, building materials, whatever you need to fix up your home or to build an addition on your house. They've got the staff and the products to help you out.
And of course, with the holiday season coming, we remind you, DIXIELINE also has holiday gift cards. If you've never been to any other stores, just take a stroll through and talk to the specialist about your needs, your ideas on projects, and just brainstorm with them. DIXIELINE, there are 9 home center stores in San Diego County celebrating 100 years of being partners with people who are building projects. These are the people at DIXIELINE Lumber. Back here as we start the second half of our bonus podcast on Hacksaw's Headlines. John, before we start, explain to everybody about what we're doing as we've just crossed the threshold of our 1-year anniversary doing podcast, what we're doing with what we're going to call Hacksaw's Insider Group.
Yeah, Hacksaw's Insiders Group is terrific. We just launched it. It's your chance to be part of the group here. We're building an email list. I want you to go to LeeHacksawHamilton.com, sign up in the orange box there, get on the email list, and we're going to have a lot of bonus content, exclusive content just for the Hacksaw's Insiders Group. We've got a couple of creative ideas we're cooking up. If you want to kind of be on the inside, sign up for Hacksaw's Insiders Group at LeeHacksawHamilton.com.
And if you like sports, check my website because I write on it every day of the week. And you can subscribe to get notifications about what we're doing by subscribing to our podcast and also by checking LeeHacksawHamilton.com. Now, before we go to the second half, you're the fan, you're the co-host, you have opinions even if some of them are from left field. What's your reaction to who Alex Spanos was, how he ran the franchise, based on the background I just gave you?
Well, it's like there's a tale of 2 parts to this. In the beginning, in the 80s, he definitely seemed like a frustrated owner. And he was trying to figure out a way to make it work. We were kind of learning more about him and his background in construction, but he was still committed to San Diego. You know, he felt like he was a partner with us. You know, the second half of his existence in San Diego is when everything went crazy and they went to LA and with his son, Dean. But I don't know. I knew he was kind of a crotchety old guy, but his heart was always in the right place.
Okay. The surfer turned general manager turned surfer. What was a fan's impression of Bobby Beatherd?
He was just a cool dude. He was like very San Diego. Like you say, he went surfing all the time. We were excited that we got him here. We had like a legit GM that had taken teams to the Super Bowl, and there was hope because, like you said earlier, there was this cycling of these guys going in and out, and we were trying to recapture that old glory. He made a lot of great draft picks. But to your point, he would reach a lot. And sometimes he was successful and other times he would get burned. And a lot of fans were like really upset. Why are you trading away a number 1 from next year to get a guy from a little college? But you always had to trust Beatherd because usually it worked out.
And Your impression as a member of John Q. Public of Boss Ross?
Oh yeah, just a solid dude. You just felt like you transfer your confidence to him. You knew he was going to do the best of what he could do with the players and personnel that he had. I was wondering if he was going to pull it off, but it did in the end. But he was always a very likable guy. He seemed to be very friendly with the media, but definitely an old school dude.
Okay, we start the second half now. This is a bonus edition of Hacksaw's Headlines, our podcast. Let's talk about players. You got to have a quarterback. If you got one, good for you. If you don't have one, you better go get one, and they got one.
Yeah, Stan Humphries came to San Diego, and Bobby Beatherd worked his magic again.
Stan Humphries was a young backup quarterback from Northeast Louisiana that the Redskins picked up late in the draft. Didn't play, sat on the bench, sat on the injured reserve list. They hit him on the IR list. Stan came to San Diego to be the starting quarterback. This is the post-Fouts era where they had gone through so many guys. Mark Vlasic, Rick Neuheisel. I mean, they just had no success. Stan Humphries shows up, and he is the starting quarterback. Good old boy. Louisiana deep South drawl, chewing tobacco, beer, the whole 9 yards. Just really liked him. Tough guy. He would stand in that pocket and he would make plays down the field and he'd get walloped. He was a firebrand of a leader. For him, the off night was going drinking with the offensive linemen.
Right on.
That's the kind of dude he was. He lived here in Poway and in Rancho Bernardo. So Stan was fierce, had a cannon for an arm, really accurate, loved to throw the deep ball. So as the team was put together, not very good early, got collectively better and better under Bobby Ross. I remember when Bobby started, I think they were 0-4 out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the columnists in the LA Times asked the question, who is this guy? Why did they hire this guy? Ross was so offended. Humphries got offended because when Ross started to get angry, his face would get red and the words wouldn't quite come out right. But Humphries knew what the hell he was saying because they're both in the deep South. And they went out and then they got better and they got better and they got better. But Stan was just, you talk about courage in the pocket and guys blitzing his brains out. He would make plays with guys in his face. He'd make plays as he's getting pounded. He'd go down the field. And then slowly but surely, they started to put good people around him. And then all of a sudden, Boss Ross had a playoff team here. And these guys had not been in the playoffs for a long time,
Really
back
long
into the
time.
middle of the Dan Fouts era. So the quarterback was really the first big acquisition. And then
I always remember the receiver here, Tony Martin, and some of the other guys they brought on board. And boy, this team really began to improve.
they got a quarterback, and then they had to go get other people around them. And they went into the free agent market, and they went into the trade market, and all of a sudden, this thing started to change. They went and rebuilt the offensive line. And you got to have guys to protect that quarterback. And they went and got a right tackle who had never been in a playoff game, had played his entire life for the lowly New Orleans Saints, Stan Brock. And he became one of their offensive captains. Big, 6'7", 320-pounder from Oregon who could move. And he had a mean streak in him. And then they went and they found a defensive end who had great feet, had hardly played in the league at all. And they made him a left tackle, Harry Swain. And he was quick, and he knew the ins and outs. He was a smart guy from New Jersey. The ins and outs of leverage and blocking and helping out and line calls. So they went and got him. And they had inherited a young center from Rice University, Courtney Hall. Courtney was the youngest center in the history of the National Football. He started an NFL game his first year out of Rice as a 19-year-old.
Wow.
And he played almost a decade before he got hurt and his knees gave out. Really good guy. Oh, went to Rice, super intellectual. He could talk to you about nuclear physics and, by the way, line calls against the blitz. So they started to piecemeal all this stuff together, and they went and got a warrior offensive guard from Michigan State, just a beast of a man, Eric Moten, quiet, really quiet. Couldn't get 6 words out of him, but boy, snapped the ball, and he would lean on people and blast people. And they rented a couple of other free agents in the offensive line, and suddenly the team got good. They went and got a wide receiver downfield. I called him Touchdown Tony Martin. He caught a ton of deep pass balls. Why the Dolphins ever let him go just absolutely stunned me. And then they went and they got an ex-Detroit Lion, Sean Jefferson. He showed up, wiry, 6'1", tough as nails, running that junk across the middle, catch the ball, get blasted, get up, go back to the huddle, do it again. And they went and they got tight ends. So they were starting to put this thing together offensively. And all of a sudden we woke up one day and that was a pretty good team that they had acquired without really hardly giving up anything.
Yeah.
Getting free agents, getting guys for 5th-round draft picks that kind of became the cornerstones of the guys that Humphries would get the ball to. So we went from that. Those names ring any bells?
They do. I mean, Tony Martin, I remember you calling the plays with Tony Martin on the deep passes. Stan Brock, Courtney Hall, right?
Yes.
That's a name that kind of old good vibes, you know? So yeah, this offensive line, they kind of put it together, and none of them were really famous guys, but they played well.
Yeah, so look, we had free agent fines there. Now, the other conventional way is when he had them draft picks, he did pretty well. I'm talking about Beatherd and what he did with draft picks. Anybody in the world could get 55 Junior Seau.
Mm-hmm.
That was a byproduct of all the bad seasons leading up to Bobby's arrival. So Seau comes in, phenomenal athlete. I mean, quickest inside linebacker, most powerful guy I had seen. I looked at him and I thought, oh, that must have been what Dick Butkus was all about. Junior's first game, a preseason game, there was so much hype when he got drafted and he signed quickly and all that. So much hype. His first game was against the Raiders in L.A. And the very first snap, the offensive guard, Steve Wisniewski, great Pro Bowler with the Raiders, tested the kid, egged him on, pushed him after the play. Seau threw a punch. Junior got thrown out of the game on the first snap of his first game in the preseason. Learning curve moment, or
right.
teachable moment. But he was the start of really good drafts when Bobby had the draft picks in his pocket. They went out because they had the passing game and they had the blockers for Stan. They went out, they needed a heavy-duty back. Natrone Means shows up, comes from North Carolina. Big, heavy-set guy. Might have been 250 on a good day, might have been 245 after he went to Popeye's Fried Chicken. But he could run, and he had, I swear to you, ballerina's feet. He could move, dart, dash. For a guy that big, I couldn't believe it. And boy, could he deliver a wallop and a blow. If, you hear the favorite term in the broadcast today, set the edge.
Yeah.
If you got to the edge and he was getting to the edge, trust me, you were going to get blasted because he ran over people, through people, not necessarily around people. And, they continued to draft. They went out, they got Rodney Harrison. Rodney Harrison had been at the University of Illinois, didn't work out academically, went small college, Western Illinois. Where? Macomb, Illinois. Western Illinois, great player, 1AA program. Rodney came in. They taught him a lot. He was a tough guy. And he became a Pro Bowl safety, and he had a really good run here. And then obviously at the end, he wound up getting traded. I think it was to New England, like Seau had been traded to Miami. At the end in the post-Beatherd era, Rodney had a good run. Those were guys that really made up that team. They also went into the marketplace and they picked up 2 defensive tackles, wide bodies. You'll remember the names. Reuben Davis, huge defensive tackle. And their other defensive tackle was, have to hit me in the head, Sean Lee. Small college kid out of North Alabama. I called them tons of fun. You could not move them. They're both plus 300 pounds. Reuben would look like an Olympic weightlifter. That's who he was. And those 2 guys with tons of fun, paired with Leslie O'Neal and another draft pick, Chris Mims, that became a pretty significant defensive front 4. So Beatherd, he went everywhere. I mean, I bet you don't know who North Alabama is. I just told you who Western Illinois was. He went and got Pro Bowl starters from places like that, in addition to what he drafted, getting 55 Junior Seau. So their player acquisitions were good. They went into the marketplace and got a journeyman punter from Buffalo, John Kidd. Snow? No snow in December here? No wind? My God, I can kick the ball. Then he did.
Mhm.
You know, and they had a great kicker in John Carney, been cut 7 times. And so Beatherd he knew where to go get all these guys and make this roster come together. So, I mean, it was a phenomenal season, a tremendous run. But that's the history of how they built what happened in 1994 that had us play in Super Bowl game in January of 1995. Final question.
Okay.
We'll talk good. We're going to have to talk bad.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Chargers made it to the Super Bowl, came up short, but then everything went sideways once the team, got beyond the Super Bowl years.
Well, this is our bonus podcast on Hacksaw's Headlines. They got there and they got beat. And then it ended there. And that was the toughest part. But that road of all those big games they had to win that they did win, what happened in the playoffs against Miami in the mud, what happened in the AFC Championship game with the terrible towels, Bill Cowher in Pittsburgh, what an electric piece of this sports community, forever to be remembered. And then obviously the big party coming home after the AFC Championship game on that Sunday night in the rain at the stadium. That was so cool. And then going to the Super Bowl, it was really hard. And I knew going in, it was going to be really hard because the 49ers had the best modern day offense in the National Football League. And the Chargers were just overwhelmed. And Steve Young just went crazy. 6-touchdown day. Couldn't stop him. But at the end of the day, and people always ask me, as the voice of the Chargers, what do you remember? And I said, yeah, that game was hard, and they were brilliant, and they just bombed our brains out. But I remember the journey more than I remember anything else. And I think that's what you have to remember is the personalities, the players, the big plays in all the games. They got us to Super Bowl Sunday. I will tell you the Super Bowl was such an unbelievably big event. I spent the whole week in Fort Lauderdale and Miami doing our talk shows every night back to San Diego. And I was overwhelmed with just the enormity of the events and the places you had to go. And I never got to go to any parties. I got to Saturday at the end of the week, and I said, I'm done. I went and got beach chairs, and I sat on the beach all day Saturday before Super Bowl Sunday.
Good for you.
Because all we had done was just work and work and work and go here and interview that person and press conferences galore. It was just way too much work. So I took that whole Saturday off. We went to the game on Sunday, and we got hit by a bolt of lightning, and it was a really long evening. But the next morning we got up, got on the bus, got on the plane coming home. Everybody felt sad. Week prior, we had gotten on a plane after Pittsburgh, and it was unbelievable that we were going to the Super Bowl. Nobody could have thought that was possible. And then obviously walking through the tunnel at Qualcomm Stadium, or at that point, Jack Murphy Stadium, walking through the tunnel with Bobby Ross, and to see 62,000 in the rain on a Sunday night at 10 p.m., it was just electric. So I remember the journey more than I remember anything else about that Super Bowl run or what happened on Super Bowl night. Shame on me, I didn't want to watch any of the replay of the game after I got home. I had it recorded. My wife had recorded it. And I couldn't look at it because I was just so disappointed that it was so bad. So months later, it's on a rainy Sunday night, I said, I'm going to watch the Super Bowl telecast, the broadcast. Flipped it in, punched it up. I mean, right there on the label, it said Chargers 49ers Super Bowl broadcast. And what comes up? Sesame Street. My kids had taken the cassette, put it in the machine, and recorded over it. And I was watching Ernie and Bert and Sesame Street. So I've never had the chance to see the replay of the Super Bowl. But NFL Films contacted me after that season and said, we're going to do a 30-minute documentary, quote, Road to the Super Bowl. And we're going to use a lot of your play-by-play, and we want some of your reflections on that. So we did a thing. And I'd totally forgotten about this till about 2 years ago. Somebody emailed me and said, Lee, are you aware what's out there on the internet? And they said, yeah, there's a YouTube documentary, Chargers Road to the Super Bowl. And it's all about you. It's about your broadcast team. It's about all the big games. So I went and looked at it. I said, oh, that is pretty cool. So those of you on our live stream, you can access that. Just go YouTube, Chargers 1994 Road to the Super Bowl. It's kind of cool. I'd rather see that than see Ernie and Bert and Sesame Street that was on my cassette. Okay, that's what I experienced. So you tell me, you were sitting in the cheap seats drinking beer at the stadium. What do you remember about the road to the Super Bowl and the playoffs and all that?
Well, just to tee it up, I remember I was a student at UCSD in the 80s, and I'm originally from San Francisco, and the Niners were great in the 80s. But the Chargers were kind of, struggling then. And then, by the late 80s, I had flipped my allegiance to the Chargers. But we couldn't see the home games because they were always blacked out. And I remember I had to go to this one sports bar like in Leucadia that had a satellite dish, and we were able to see the games. But it was like you said, they were 4-12. It was just a really tough go. I remember they had Marion Butts was the running back, and he was pretty good for a while. But then when this thing started to build, you could sense that so many Charger fans were so disappointed from what didn't happen 10 years prior with the Fouts and the Joyner and that whole era. And now suddenly we have a chance again. Now and with some guys that really are not that big of superstars, guys like Stan Humphries, he's no Dan Fouts, but boy, he's getting the thing done. And as that thing built, the whole community in San Diego was wearing blue and gold. And it was like a party here during that playoff stretch run. I had season tickets that year, so I saw the Miami game, and that was just tremendous. And yeah, when they played Pittsburgh and when who was the guy's name that knocked the Gibson, right?
Dennis Gibson.
Dennis Gibson knocks the ball away in the end zone. And it was just like celebration. And then they had that big this big party at Qualcomm. I mean, those are such good vibes. And it's so disappointing that they're not here with us anymore. But if anyone's been in San Diego for a number of decades, you remember that era as very special.
The coolest thing, I had a speaking engagement Christmas week of that year, downtown in University Tower. And I remember it was in the evening, and I went down there. It was dark, and I'm driving through downtown, and every office building either had Christmas lights or lights with the lightning bolt, the
Yes.
Charger logo. It was so cool. And then it dawned on me, boy, this community has just put its arms around Charger football. And I couldn't go anywhere without getting stopped. And I'd be doing a talk show in the drugstore, and a talk show in the barbershop, talk show while I'm pumping gas. Everybody wanted to talk about the bolt. And people yell at me across the parking lot, show me your lightning bolt. So that was just really cool. But it ended there on that Super Bowl Sunday. And players would say, we'll be back.
Yeah.
Next year. Well, there was no next year. And it's so hard to get back to the Super Bowl. And there's so many things that change about your team then. Hey, listen, we hope you've enjoyed Chapter 1, this special Hacksaw Headlines Focus. Chargers, yeah, they took our team. They took our colors. They took our name. They can't take our memories. Hope you enjoyed Chapter 1, Chargers Road to the Super Bowl. Brought to you by DIXIELINE Lumber and Home Center Stores. 9 locations to serve you, more than 100 years in business. Got plans for the fall or the winter? Need a partner to help you get through the project? You need your best friend, DIXIELINE Lumber and Home Center Stores. We look forward to talking to you once again. Chapter 2 is coming up. Thanks for being with us on Hacksaw's Headlines.
Join us again for Hacksaw's Headlines on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And find the audio version on your favorite podcast apps. For more content, go to LeeHacksawHamilton.com.